So when this starts at 2:30, I'm going to give like a very brief 30-second introduction, announcing that this is part of the conference, and then I'm going to hand over to you, Margaret.
Sounds good.
Sorry if this is a silly question, but can you just confirm to me how you pronounce your last name, please?
Yeah, it's Poydock.
Okay. Thank you. Did anyone have any other questions? Not for now, okay.
I guess I do have one quick question looking over sort of run a show. So 2 workers, Monique Rand and Barry Rose, are they here now or, so I'm in speaker view, so.
Yeah.
Okay, hi Barry, nice to meet you. Good, how about yourself?
Yes, this is Monique.
Okay, I wasn't sure, I said Angela Monique, so you go by Monique though?
Both.
Both, okay. Do you prefer Monique or do you prefer Angela Monique?
I prefer Monique for now.
Okay.
It's actually, my first name is Angela. My middle name is Monique. Just depends on which setting we're in.
Great. Well, I just wanted to confirm and see what you preferred. So I'll go with Monique.
Thank you.
I guess one additional point, when it comes to answering questions from the audience, we can encourage people to write questions in the chat. If you prefer, we can unmute guests and allow them to ask their questions from the video with all the sort of hazards that can entail. That's kind of your call.
I mean, I do defer to the group. The one event or session I have attended, it was read out loud versus the speakers or the guests or audience asking the question. I think that went well. So I think I'm going to default to having people answer in the chat, and then I can ask them out loud.
That makes sense. On several of our earlier calls, there's been a gentleman in the chat who's been commenting a lot called Roy Jaggers. We're not sure entirely who he is, but some of his comments have been not extreme, but a little distracting. We've messaged him. He may come to this meeting, he may come to one of the others, but I suppose if he's here, I don't think it necessarily needs to occupy much mental space, but not to be distracted by it.
Thanks for the heads up on that.
This TV works good, right? Your TV fell over. How'd that happen? You got a cat or something? You need a cat. Not the TV over. I don't know. Right? Shit. Yeah, I don't want this in the file world. Fucking kill this. When they come in and be on the top of this table. And then they missed the bed. You know, the bed right there in the fan. Yeah. Yeah, like, shit. Hit the floor. He broke. That's crazy. I just bought the TV stand. He says, did you get a bad TV stand? I just bought it. Also, it doesn't got the legs like you know. When I came home,
I assume Patrick will let people in.
Hi, Lily.
How's it going?
So we're recording. We've tested the PowerPoint. We've tested the YouTube video. I'm gonna spotlight myself when I'm using that, but then I'll probably unspotlight the remainder of the time.
Right. Sounds good. If anything comes up, just shoot me a text. I'm happy to jump back in. And
I've given a Jaggers warning.
awesome.
I'll text you if there's any problems.
Sounds good. All right, I'm gonna hop out.
Okay, thank you. I think it looks like it might take a few more minutes for people to show up. I know they just had a session that just ended. So we can hold off a few minutes if you like. Okay, you ready to start? I think people are going to start filtering in. I'll just admit everyone if that's okay. Okay, thank you everyone for joining us. think we're going to start now. My name is Patrick Dixon, and I'm a research analyst at the Kalmanovitz Initiative for Labour and the Working Poor at Georgetown University. On behalf of the Kalmanovitz Initiative, I'd like to welcome you to this panel on racial discrimination and the temp economy that is part of a multi-day convening, constructing a new social compact, a public forum on empowering the post-pandemic working class. We hope you'll join us for a number of the sessions that we've got on. We are recording today's session. Please join the discussion by submitting your questions through the Q&A function. Today's moderator will be Margaret Poydock, policy analyst at the Economic Policy Institute. I'm delighted to hand it over to Margaret. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick. Again, just want to welcome everyone and thank you for joining this concurrent session titled Racial Discrimination and the Temp Economy. Like Patrick said, my name is Margaret Poydock and I'm a policy analyst at EPI, or the Economic Policy Institute, and I'll be moderating this panel. So the goal of this convening we are all attending this week is to envision and advance a new social compact that centers on working people and their communities as we move towards a post-pandemic world. Constructing a new social compact will require the implementation of bold, innovative structures to create an equitable economy that eliminates hiring gaps based on race. This session, Racial Discrimination in the Temp Economy, will discuss a recent report by members of today's panel, and the report is titled Opening the Door, Ending Racial Discrimination in Industrial Temp Hiring Through Innovative Enforcement. So that report outlines the prevalence of the race-based hiring discrimination Black and Latinx workers experience in the temporary staffing sector in Chicago area. Our panel will discuss the report's findings, what it means for workers in the temporary staffing industry, and the efforts to combat this unlawful discrimination. We will also hear from workers about their experiences working in the temporary staffing and warehouse industries and the discrimination they have experienced themselves. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our excellent panel. We have Brittany Scott, who is a senior research strategist for Partners for Dignity and Rights. Roberto Clack, who is the executive director of Warehouse Workers for Justice. Tim Bell, the executive director of Chicago Workers Collaborative. And we are also joined by two workers, Monique Rand and Barry Rose. So before we begin this presentation, I think we're going to start with a brief video. Patrick, do you mind putting that up?
Okay. So, bear with me just a second here. Sorry.
Sorry, y'all, I'm an amateur at this. I'm trying to get some better lighting so you can see my face. I'm speaking today on the discrimination with these temp agencies throughout Chicagoland.
Temp agencies know what they're doing. Discrimination, exploitation, it's rough.
The discrimination against Black and brown, they pull us against each other.
As a Black woman, I not only experience discrimination because of my race, also my gender.
Donde el supervisor me discriminó por ser mujer y por ser latina.
Every day you say, what are you doing here? Go back to Mexico.
We were told not to integrate with the African Americans because we were considered lazy. When I spoke out against it, I was retaliated by no longer receiving assignments.
If people didn't like the way you looked, you'd get sent home one way or another.
It's a world where workers say their rights are violated. NBC5's Ana Devlantes has that story.
It happens every morning right here in Chicago.
Client businesses that requested not to be sent workers of a certain type.
And not being considered for the job. The job was mainly for men.
Men only. No one over 35 years old. Good old boy as per customer. No B people.
They would say they need basketball players, hockey players, or either soccer players. You do the math.
And me being a strong person, knowing that I deserve a job, I'm here today demanding a change because this needs to stop.
So I would now like to turn it over to Brittany Scott to begin the presentation on the report's findings.
And I think as I get started, Patrick will bring up a PowerPoint slide too that has some visuals. But hi, good afternoon. My name is Brittany Scott. I'm a senior research strategist at Partners for Dignity and Rights, formerly known as NESRI, the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative. We partner with communities directly impacted by rights violations to build a movement for economic and social rights by putting people's experiences at the center of efforts to build power, shift narratives, and change policies. In February of this year, in collaboration with our partners here, the Chicago Workers Collaborative and Warehouse Workers for Justice, we launched a new report, Opening the Door, Ending Racial Discrimination in Industrial Temp Hiring Through Innovative Enforcement. The report features first of its kind research substantiating widespread race-based hiring discrimination and job channeling by industrial temp staffing agencies in the Chicago area. I get to share with you a bit about what that looked like and what we found. In 2019, we contracted the Equal Rights Center, a DC-based civil rights firm, to work with us and our community partners to develop a methodology to rigorously document the hiring discrimination and job segregation that we knew from workers that temp agencies were facilitating for factories and warehouses throughout the Chicago metro. The Equal Rights Center specializes in a well-established technique for measuring and documenting patterns of discrimination called match pairs testing. This method has an important place in the history of civil rights struggle, particularly in Chicago. In 1966, Dr. King gave a speech in which he explained how organizers used a form of match pairs testing to expose discrimination among real estate offices in Chicago and pressure for reforms in the housing market as part of the Chicago Freedom Movement. The basic technique used at that time was to have two equally qualified rental applicants, one white and one black, apply to rent the same apartment or house and compare the treatment they received from landlords and real estate agents to see if there was discrimination based on race. Since then, organizations like the Equal Rights Center have adopted this technique to investigate other forms of discrimination, including employment discrimination. And match pairs testing has continued to be a powerful tool to support policy campaigns and enforcement actions. So what we did in Chicago in 2019, shortly before the pandemic, with our community partners was recruit and train a team of experienced Black and Latinx temp workers to work as testers and report as neutral fact finders. Then we, with the Equal Rights Center's guidance, conducted match pairs tests at 60 agencies in the Chicago area. During each test, pairs of equally qualified job applicants, one Black applicant and one Latinx applicant, went into staffing agencies and applied within minutes of one another. We made sure that the people in each testing pair were well matched with one another in terms of variables other than race. They were the same gender, approximately the same age, with approximately the same work experience. We structured each test to make sure it met strict methodological guidelines and made sure each person in the pair dressed appropriately for manual labor, presented the same relevant qualifications, same job preferences, and that they said that they had the same access to transportation. As soon as the testers left each agency, we documented the treatment they received by administering a detailed survey, which they completed independently of one another so that testers did not know what treatment their partners received, and they reported just on their individual experiences. We chose the agencies we tested based on a random sampling method developed with the help of an economist, Mark Bendick. And because the results are from a random sample of agencies, we believe the treatment that our testers received is representative of the industry practices in the Chicago area. We set out to compare the experiences of Black and Latinx workers for a couple of reasons. First, members of these groups make up most of the people applying for jobs in this industry, over 80%. And there's been a mounting abundance of anecdotal evidence, investigative journalism, like you saw in that clip, and litigation, also saw a little bit in the clip, that suggests staffing agencies are engaging in racial discrimination, that they're fulfilling race-based labor orders of their client companies to ostensibly limit Black workers' access to jobs and exercise what appears to be an unlawful preference for Latinx workers they perceive to be more vulnerable. which, you know, is stoking racial antagonisms amongst workers that makes organizing efforts for better pay and conditions much more difficult. So this documentation through match pairs testing was our way of systematically investigating the prevalence of these practices within the industry, supporting what workers already know to be true, and you know, and creating the kind of defensible evidence that can then be used to fight for changes, reforms needed in the policy arena, and also support enforcement actions by public agencies or litigation. So what did we find? Do you happen to have the PowerPoint presentation, or are we just going without? Sorry.
Bring up the PowerPoint, yeah.
Just see if, I mean, yeah, we can just, it's also okay to, sometimes it's better to just hear things, right? But folks might want to look at something other than me. So yeah, great. And we'll come back to the, I think this cover, which somebody took inside of one of the temp agencies, tells, you know, the story pretty well. But we'll actually go to the next slide and talk to you about what we found. So there, with nearly 700 registered temp agencies in the Chicago area, temp agencies are as ubiquitous as having all the McDonald's in the entire state of Illinois packed into the metro. Through the rigorous match pairs testing methodology designed by the Equal Rights Center, we tested a random sample, as I said, of 60 of these staffing agencies and confirmed widespread hiring discrimination and job channeling based on race. Specifically, as you see here, we found 2/3 of temp agencies engaged in racial discrimination in the hiring process, primarily against Black applicants. This looked like offering jobs to only one applicant, allowing only one applicant to apply, giving only one of them information or assistance, offering more or better jobs to one, or depriving one applicant of opportunities offered to the other, and vice versa. 2/3. Finding discrimination hiring this widespread suggests discriminatory hiring is a major feature of what temp agencies in Chicago are offering client companies. A quick story, an example from our study in which, like all our tests, a Black worker walks into a temp agency, followed 20 minutes later by a Latinx worker that's matched in every way except race, and have completely different experiences. Friday morning, Michael, a 56-year-old Black man, arrived at a staffing agency near O'Hare Airport. He asked an employee at the agency if they're hiring and was told they're not. He's not asked about his background or qualifications. Michael leaves his contact information, never receives a follow-up call. 20 minutes later, Jose, a 50-year-old Latinx man, arrives at the same staffing agency and, like Michael, asks if they're hiring. The employee asks Jose what shifts he's available, whether he has a car, and then describes a warehouse job at a factory 5 miles away, telling Jose that he can start on Monday. After having him fill out an application, the employee gives Jose a work order and tells him who he's to report to. The employee then tells Jose that he's looking to hire at least one more worker for the job and encourages him to refer friends to the agency. If you can go to the next slide. So altogether, our testers were offered 204 jobs from the 60 agencies tested, confirming our testers' credibility. Of these 204 job offers, we found 82% were racially segregated. 82%. Meaning the jobs were offered to either only the Latinx applicant or only the Black applicant, but not both. With over 500,000 temp assignments made in the Chicago metro area in 2019, our study suggests as many as 423,000 of them were racially segregated. If you could go to the next slide. So Black and Latinx workers are both being negatively affected. In our study, Black workers received just 3 job offers to every 4 offered to Latinx workers. Job offers made through follow-up calls were even more biased in favor of Latinx workers. Job offers made through, job offers made through follow-up calls were even more biased in favor of Latinx workers who received nearly 2 times as many job offers as their Black counterparts. Clearly, anti-Black bias permeates hiring in the blue-collar temp sector, much like it does the low-wage labor market in general. Our study found Black workers being treated as on-call backup workers to Latinx workers. They're being treated as candidates of last resort because they are Black. The only jobs offered to our Black testers at an equal or higher rate were less desirable jobs, the lowest paying jobs, and the second or third shifts at factories. At the same time, Latinx workers are being sought out for what other studies have exposed as exploitation in the workplace, dangerous working conditions at sub-minimum wages. Our study confirmed that temp agencies are concentrated in Latinx neighborhoods. 70% of our random sample was located in a Latinx neighborhood, compared with just 8% in a predominantly Black neighborhood. Companies appear to be using race and ethnicity as indicators of increased vulnerability associated with undocumented immigration status. They're exercising an unlawful preference for workers they perceive to be more vulnerable and likely to silently accept abusive conditions. Certainly, the temp arrangement keeps workers particularly vulnerable to retaliation, which is even more pervasive in temp work than other parts of the low-wage sector, where it's already notably widespread. So put another way, the discriminatory hiring we documented among Chicago's temp agencies is facilitating the exploitation of both Black and Latinx workers. If you could go to the next slide. One more here. In looking at these findings in light of past research in this industry, I want to highlight 3 takeaways. 1, our public enforcement systems are not designed to eradicate these abuses. 2, hiring discrimination contributes to the broader enforcement crisis in the temp sector. And 3, as hiring discrimination enables companies to gain market share, it becomes a virtual requirement of market competition. Our public enforcement systems rely almost exclusively on individual workers' complaints, but hiring discrimination is nearly impossible for workers individually to prove. Certainly, you might leave a staffing agency and feel like something went wrong, but having the actual proof based on your individual experience is not a thing. So, nor can the workers who are most impacted by these abuses take on fighting prolonged legal battles or even risk retaliation to raise the issue. There's little to no outside monitoring to catch these kinds of abuse. In combination with the retaliation we know is also widespread in this sector of the labor market, hiring discrimination is creating major barriers to holding companies accountable for workers' rights and improving workers' pay and conditions more broadly. By targeting workers perceived to be vulnerable, companies are cultivating a culture of fear in the workplace that's perpetuated thereafter by subtle and not so subtle threats and retaliation. As I said before, the temp arrangement in and of itself keeps workers uniquely vulnerable to retaliation. As these strategies, hiring discrimination and retaliation, enable companies to gain market share, they become, as I said, a virtual requirement of market competition. Temp agencies compete for low bid contracts in the supply chains of brand name companies. Without effective enforcement, discrimination and retaliation become an advantage that enables abusive temp agencies to secure contracts and deliver profits up the chain to the companies at the top. It's the business practices of companies at the top of the supply chains that incentivize this abuse, and if held responsible, can incentivize the exact opposite. The companies at the top of supply chains are best positioned to flip incentives for their subcontractors to comply with workers' rights rather than undermine them, including the temp agencies and labor brokers at the bottom. Thank you.
Thank you, Brittany, for outlining the report's findings. I think we'll turn over next to Roberto Clack, the Executive Director of the Warehouse Workers for Justice, to discuss what these findings mean for warehouse workers or the warehouse industry.
Yeah, some people may be familiar with our work, but we're located outside of North America's largest inland port in Joliet and Elwood, Illinois. And it's one of the biggest warehouse hubs in the country and really the world. And 3.5% of the nation's GDP moves in and out of our region in the state. And it's the fastest job growth region in the state. And we know everything that's happened during COVID and, unemployment and closing of businesses. the warehousing and logistics industry has been extremely resilient during this crisis, and in many cases have grown. But when we talk about these trends, we need to realize that this is happening throughout corporate America, throughout some of the biggest corporations in the world supply chain. This staffing agency structure is not unusual. In 2012, we dug in and fought at Walmart's largest warehouse in Elwood, Illinois. And there are up to 10 staffing agencies operating there. But if you go to Mars down the street, if you go to Target, if you go to many of these Fortune 500 companies, you're going to see the same trends. So when we talk about developing accountability, we're talking about corporate accountability and holding accountable some of the richest corporations in the world. And further, we were founded in 2009, and this discrimination that was documented so well through opening the door is something that we've experienced throughout the history of our organization. This is endemic in the hiring practices of these major warehouse operators and their subcontractors and staffing agencies, right? So we're really talking about fighting for worker justice, fighting for changes. There's no difference between the fight for workers' rights and the fight for racial justice. That's what this report makes so abundantly clear. It's why we're so motivated. It's why we're excited to see Black Lives Matter take such a center stage in our society, in our movements. And as worker organizations, we need to embrace this movement moment, but we need to make the connection between what's happening in the workforce and what's happening for racial justice in society. We had a protest at Mars where workers were demanding PPE and hazard pay and better safety. And the worker leaders who were part of that campaign spontaneously started chanting, Black Lives Matter, shut it down, right? And the fight is one and the same. And many people in the workforce understand this. And we need to fight for liberation, we need to fight for racial justice, and we need to fight discrimination. We need to end these practices. We need to stop our communities from being pitted one against one another. When there's antagonism in the communities, and we know that there's antagonism between Blacks and Browns sometimes, much of this starts in the workplace. And it's the employers who use the divisiveness of racism to create tension. And it's to lower our labor standards, and it's to keep us divided, right? So this report's a clarion call. We already knew this was happening. We knew this was happening. Workers, if you talk to any worker who works at a warehouse and ask if they feel that they're being discriminated against, every single one of our members is going to say yes, without exception, that they feel that they've been in a circumstance where they've been discriminated, where it hurt their ability to have quality employment, and where it just, it steered them into, bad economic circumstance. Without exception, any of our members would say this. Now we have something to back it up. And we're proud to support and be a part of this larger effort with our partners here, but let's take this very seriously. Let's use this to motivate us. Let's use this to fight back, to fight for racial justice and worker justice, realizing that it's the same. And thank you.
Great. Thank you, Roberto. You just got to say it again. Labor rights are civil rights. Economic justice is racial justice as well. So I'd like to turn finally to our final panelist, Tim Bell, the Executive Director of Chicago Workers Collaborative, to discuss the report's findings and how, I mean, it impacts temp workers, but just his lay of the land for the temp industry.
I think you're muted, Tim. I think you're muted. Can you hear me?
He is muted. There you go.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you.
Better.
There you go.
All right, thanks. Sorry about that, you guys. So the Chicago Workers Collaborative has been organizing temporary workers for about 20 years. We've passed some of the strongest legislation in the country together with Warehouse Workers for Justice. And we have in Illinois, the best regulations around the temp industry, but that doesn't mean that the temp industry is in any way a better place to work, because the enforcement of rights in the temp industry is all based on individual workers being able to come forward with claims. And as we heard in this report, discrimination is widespread, despite the fact in Illinois that temp agencies have to report their demographic information on the people they hire to the state. The reason why discrimination continues in our state is because we do not have adequate monitoring that's driven by the workers and which can get to the source of the problems. Which is why we have come up together with Warehouse Workers for Justice and Brittany's organization, the Partners for Dignity and Rights, with a new program which we are calling the Temp Agency Seal of Approval Program. It's a program where temp agencies would have a market incentive to stop discriminating. The market incentive would be that they would be able to get more contracts if they were willing to sign agreements that would eliminate discrimination and also enforce other types of standards, like legal standards, in addition to code of conduct standards in the temp agencies. And the way that we propose to do this is in the following way. We need to create an independent monitoring process that's grounded in community partnerships. There's a complaint process that's involved. There's audits and testing. And the most important thing is that there's worker education and support. In other words, if you're a worker in a temp agency that has the seal of approval, you will be able to enforce your rights by calling a monitor, and the monitor can come into the facility and almost immediately check to see if the discrimination is happening, if the hiring is discriminatory, if your paycheck is short, if the health and safety conditions are not compliant. And in order to keep that seal of approval, the temp agency would have to make a change in the way that it's working, or it would lose the seal of approval. Now, why the hell would any company want a temp agency that has a seal of approval when what they really would like is a temp agency that divides and conquers workers and keeps standards low? So that's where the market incentives come in. The market incentives have to do with the community and our organizations coming together to change the procurement practices of government, including counties, city government, state agencies, and so on, who contract a ton of temp work, that they would only use, that in their procurement process, that they would only use agencies with the temp agency seal of approval, in order to create a business opportunity for agencies that have the seal. In the private sector, it would look something like this. So Barry, he works at Gold Standard Baking. There's a temp agency there called Elite Staffing. Elite Staffing is notorious for all sorts of unsavory business practices, including discrimination. In order to continue it, and what Gold Standard Baking does is they make croissants. It's an industrial bakery. They make croissants for Starbucks. The way that the seal of approval would work is we would put pressure on Starbucks to say, you know what, Starbucks, in your supply chain, we want the temp agencies that are being used by your suppliers to have the seal of approval. And we want you to sign a legally binding agreement that you will do that. And therefore, your suppliers would have to prove to you that they are using a code compliant seal of approval temp agency in their supply chain. Therefore, in Barry's factory, Elite Staffing, if they're going to continue to be at that company, they would need to have the seal. If they don't have the seal, then a temp agency that does have it would be given the opportunity to have the business instead of Elite Staffing. And the enforcement of independent monitoring would come into play. And issues such as discrimination, sexual harassment, and the many other types of abuses that happen in the temp industry could be ferreted out through the independent monitoring that's driven by workers who are educated about their rights. This is the seal of approval program in a nutshell. There's many more pieces to it than this, but that's the general idea that we're pushing for. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Tim. Next, I would actually like to turn it over to two workers that we have joining us that have lived what this report is finding, Monica Rand and Barry Rose. Just want to, again, thank you for taking the time to be here with us, first of all. Monique, sorry. Monique, apologies. You actually participated as a tester for this report and study. I was wondering if you can first share your experience with discrimination by these staffing agencies, and then Barry, you could follow Monique and discuss your own experience.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. So first off, I'm start off with my experience, but I was not made aware of the video with everyone else. And it's like almost moving to tears that, you know, once you find out you're not the only one being discriminated against, but once it's happening to you, you feel like you're the only one in the trenches of it. And it's just like, wow. Like you said, like Tim said, it is countrywide. It's not just Illinois, but I digress. I'm sorry. My own personal experience is just all ranges of it, as far as job assignments, being verbally told to your face, you know, nothing's available, and you literally see, because like the partner matching session, you literally see your partner go in after you and come back with a paper. And it's like, one company I went to apply for, they told me the computer was down. I literally had to fill out a paper application. A few minutes later, here my partner comes in. She not only is able to use the computer, she said, I need help. Why did the receptionist come over and assist her on filling out her application? No, you cannot do that. I mean, you can let them know this section you forgot to sign your name or something. You can't help somebody filling in their personal information on the application to get a job and then tell me that, you know, I'm not even able to use the computer. What's the difference? So I just blatantly, they'll do things to your face. I appreciate this study so much, and that you all are releasing this information, because not only to see, like I said, the blatancy of it, it's just the whole ratio of the percentages to see, like you said, Margaret, that we actually going through it. You know, it's like racially fueled along with economically. So it's just a too much of a tie that brings in together that it's like, are you systematically really trying to keep a certain group of people down? And it's like money matters more than morale in your company. And so those are my experiences, and it's hurtful. it's disgusting, and I am definitely down for anything else you all need to find out about, because like when you follow that money trail, you'll definitely see how high corruption goes. Thank you.
I'd like to turn it to Barry now too. Welcome.
My experience being a temp worker, lack of knowledge. I didn't know too much about temp agencies and proceedings, and really didn't know my rights. That if you become a temp worker, that you can work on the job and actually get the job. So by me being a temp worker, and I see everybody going before me, and then they got better jobs than me, and they always gave me the worst job ever. So one day a lady told me, she said, Barry, you could get hired. You have been here like 8 months. And I was like, wow, I didn't know that. So she's like, I said, what I gotta do to get hired? So she introduced me to a Latino worker, and the Latino worker that I was working for, she became very, very mean to me and started giving me a lot of crappy jobs, worse than the jobs that I had. So eventually she told me she'll make sure that I didn't get the job. And I had been working there 8 months. So she made a promise and she kept her promise. And next thing you know, I was DNR. But didn't nobody know why I was DNR, because I came to work on time. I punched in the clock on time. I did everything I was supposed to do to be just a temp worker. But I didn't ever get the job. So I had a meeting with Tim Bell and the Chicago Workers Collaborative, and they was telling me about my rights as a worker, that that they supposed to hire you. They don't just supposed to say, okay, you no longer need it. So we had another meeting with some big company about the temp workers and how I was laid off and DNR and fired. So then with the big company, they brought me back on to elite staffing, and elite staffing sent me back out to another building over on Bedford Park. And then when I went to Bedford Park, they was, oh my God, they had us doing like the maintenance man job, keeping the machines running and stuff. And then one day they put on the board that everybody will get a bonus. They put it on the TV screen, everybody will get a bonus, and they checked, but they didn't mean temp workers. And then the place was very unsafe. We put an action out there. We had told everybody about how safe the company was, because they were sending the temp workers to do various jobs that wasn't safe. So they did an audit out there and everything. So they was trying to find out who was the rat in the company, which it was me. So they got mad and they terminated me from their job. So I was still with Elite, and then Elite found Gold Standard Bacon for me. Then I go to Gold Standard Bacon, they was even discriminating even more there. I was like, wow, everybody discriminate, because they would hire temp workers, but wouldn't actually give them a job. They would tell them, hey, we'll give you a job in 90 days. But instead of giving you a job in 90 days, they will fire you in 90 days and then rehire you back in another 30 days. So when I came out there and the lady told me how I was going to get fired, I was like, wow. So I talked to Tim Bell. I said, Tim Bell, we got to do something about this. Because she said to me, after my 90 days, they was going to fire me. And she already had it in mind, but I'm always coming to work on time and being on time and punching in like they told me in 90 days, they'll give me a job. So within the 90 days, it was so hot in the building. People was falling out. And they would try to send you right back into the same predicament that you was in.
That was only the black workers. That wasn't the Latino workers, right?
The black workers worked on the oven where it was really, really hot. And everybody else, they had their little water station right by. We had to go walk around the corner to get to the water station. So right now, at Gold Standard Bacon, they got a water station everywhere in every sector where people get water. But at the time, everybody was falling out. They had like 2 or 3 fans. You know what I'm saying? People was passing out. They was, and then, so me and Tim, we got together. and we put an action on gold standard banking to make them hire people. They say they gonna hire you in 30 days, hire you. If you come to work and do everything they told you to do, hire these people. But the bakery, they was like turning them around. I had seen people there that been turned around 3 or 4 times. And then when I broke the mold with the action, they took me into a little room, told me like, what do you want? All I want is a job. I don't play games. I come to work, I want a job. So eventually they hired me. And then when the people found out that that I had did the action out there and we had closed their parking lot up with all the people protesting to hire Black workers. So then they started hiring us. But then the people nominated me to be the union steward. So then I became the union steward. I've been on 2 bargaining committees to make sure people get hired when they say they get hired, when they say they gonna hire you, and people start getting hired. And you know what I'm saying? The main thing is knowing your rights. Like if I would have met the Chicago Workers Collaborative and they know my rights, I would just went home and wouldn't even look for another job after I was treated at Elite. But Elite was trying to push me to the job, and the job was trying to push me back to Elite. Now, I'm making sure people know their rights, know their contracts, know what's in the company policy. So, because if you don't know your rights, if you don't know what's in the contract, you don't know your policy, they will fire you. You don't even like. They try to get you to remember what happened 3-4 months ago. You can't remember what happened 3-4 months ago. You know what I'm saying? It's like you got to do things on time because the company, they lacking. They just the other day they fired like 40 people. Then 40 more people. You know what I'm saying? Because they don't know their rights.
And that's how the temp industry, unfortunately, unless we can do that type of action and that type of intense sort of organizing in every single factory, it's the scale of monitoring and the scale of being able to protect worker rights is virtually impossible. So, yeah, I mean, this is the typical experience. If a Black worker does get a job at a temp agency, they're rotated in and out, and they're put in the worst job, like in the ovens or whatever. And then we have to fight to get just like on the fan and some water or whatever. So it's like the experience of everybody. So even if you do get a job, it's like you wish you didn't have it, right?
You all just made me think about that when you just said that, because I've worked at another big name company and I'm UPS. And when it's hot and you're unloading those trucks or loading them, they come around and give you water. I never would have expected you to say that. Like they come around and give you freeze pops, fresh fruit, bottles of water, any, thing to replenish your nutrients or something. That's just, see what I'm saying? It's like you never know till you hear somebody else's experience. That's just crazy. And you'll pass out from heat exhaustion. That's a health risk.
That's what people was doing, passing out. And then all the people that passed out, they were so enthusiastic on getting the job. They never, when we did the march, then none of them show up for the march. They all were like, yeah, we're gonna come. But none of them showed up. But then when they seen change coming, then I should have came.
Right.
So when you get people ready, riled up, they don't show up. And they know they need change. But as soon as change comes, we needed that. But you gotta help me fight. You know what I'm saying? I can't fight by myself, which I've been doing a lot of fighting by myself in some of these companies. They see me, they get terrified. I tell them, I got a team of lawyers. So watch what you say, watch what you do. I'm not just by myself anymore. I know my rights.
Yeah.
So they get scared of me. They don't be playing with me like that. Move around. But you got to know your rights. If you don't, they will mess you over. They have the Black and brown people. I see this one lady. She spoke very good English, but she never said a word. So that means they told them not to even talk to us. You know what I'm saying? Because we start trouble. Because we think My boss always told me, we pay you to work, not think. Now, how am I gonna work without thinking?
Be a zombie. Be a zombie.
She used to always tell me that.
Barry, can I ask you a question? Yeah. So when you were a temp worker at Elite Staffing, did you see that the Latino workers were being picked over the local workers?
They'll pick the little people, the skinny people, all of them go first. The Latino people, they all go first. Then we'll be always the last one. And then if you're the last one, you got to go back home. And guess how long that ride is or that walk? Because if you don't get picked, say for instance, I used to come from South Harlem all the way over to 55th and Spalding. And I used to leave my house at 1 o'clock, get there at 3 o'clock, and they don't send me out till 5 o'clock. And then they picking over us for those next 2 hours to get us into work. And if you didn't get picked, you got to go back. So how many hours out of wasted just being in the temp agency?
I had that experience before too. Yeah, where you just waiting there. And then they'll short your time, because if you there 4 hours, you're supposed to get guaranteed 4 hours of pay. They'll make sure they send you out in enough time that you don't get the guaranteed 4 hours of pay either. They'll make sure they send you home without an assignment before you. I've experienced that too.
With Elite, they don't want you to make overtime, because then you making more than the staff members. So they're trying to keep your overtime money, and you to work for this company overtime. So I told the lady, I said, listen, I work overtime, but my check was the same as when I worked 40 hours. How could that be? She said, you didn't get approved to work overtime. I was like, wow, I wonder what my lawyer gonna say about all of this. Because I got a team of lawyers, so next thing you know, my check was right. They weren't telling me that no more. But had I not known that, see, you got 500 workers, and they just taking your overtime money. You know what I'm saying? And you don't know your rights, or you don't know how to get your money. Because I know Elite, they used to always double money. Be a day short, a week short. People come in talking about they check ain't right, because they're a temp worker. No, come on, pay me. I work for this company, now I want to get paid. You know what I'm saying? That's why you gotta know your rights. And the people gotta know their rights. So it's a lot of work teaching people their rights. Because there's a lot of people that's going in these temp agencies, they don't even know their rights. You know what I'm saying? They don't know what the next step, they don't know they can get hired. You know what I'm saying? Like now, look at me, I'm a union steward on the safety committee. You know what I'm saying? Now I'm helping other people learn their rights, teaching them. Now, what if I just went on that day that lady fired me? What would these other people need? You know how many jobs I got for people? Everybody that I got at the Gold Standard Banking trained, and they still there. And they know their rights. So somebody go to them with some false information, HR coming in with some false information, the whole building, look who they looking for. Barry Rose. They looking for.
Thank you, Monique and Barry, for sharing your experiences. And I think this is actually kind of a good transition of, I want to kind of discuss a little bit more into the seal of approval program and how that will address hiring discrimination, as well as, I guess, really foster a way for workers to organize. I don't know if Tim or Roberto want to discuss that at all.
Sure. Roberto, you wanna talk about that first, or no? Okay. So, like in this particular case, where Barry was working Gold Standard Baking, they had they typically would have 300 direct hire, no, maybe 200 direct hire workers and 250 temp workers. And there was a union there, they had a union contract. Under the seal of approval program, the way that we would work is we would put pressure on the company at the top to have an agreement with Gold Standard Baking that they would only use a seal approved agency. The agencies that are seal approved, okay, would have standards that the workers would be educated to enforce, that would include things like the hiring practices are equal, and that they keep documentation about who's looking for jobs and who's assigned for jobs, and that these jobs would be assigned not on a bias basis, but on the qualifications of the person. If the company did not, if that temp agency did not do that, a worker could tell the independent monitor, which is enabled under the contract to investigate any kind of claim. Okay, they would come in and check the documentation. They would interview workers. They would then make a recommendation as to whether or not the company was engaged in discrimination. If it was to engage in discrimination, the company would get a chance to improve its practices. And if it happened again, then the company would lose its seal under this program. So that's the basics of how it would work. It creates a market incentive for temp agencies to abide by the law, as opposed to the present system, which is that companies will choose temp agencies based on the ones that are willing to discriminate, willing to only bring in certain kinds of workers that the company wants because of the company's own biases about how those workers will perform. And generally speaking, what the companies want is undocumented immigrants, mostly Latino immigrants that are non-English speaking, who have no idea, and they're very afraid of deportation or very afraid of complaining about any kind of conditions, and are willing to work for lower wages. And then also, you know, by preferring those particular workers, they're dividing the Latino workers against the Black workers and vice versa, which weakens the entire workforce. So it's a way of creating power for workers and having workers drive the process of enforcement and monitoring. And then it actually has consequences for the temp agency that engages in any kind of substandard practices.
I'll just add, back in December of 2018, which seems so long ago now, we stopped 2 staffing agencies from getting a special use permit in Joliet, Illinois, based off of the poor labor rights that they promote in the warehouses, right? And, you know, the city councilors agreed that there's a lot of labor violations and problems with these staffing agencies. So a situation like this where you need a special use permit, you know, what we're thinking, you know, moving forward is that we could require something like the seal of approval as part of that permit process. And I think there's different leverage points we can use both within municipalities and governmental agencies to ensure that certain requirements, and we're talking about like the baseline. We're not talking about the PRO Act or card check neutrality or anything like that. We're saying no egregious discrimination within your employment model. You know, like that's what we're asking for. That's a very modest demand. And if you can't do that, you know, you're not going to receive the business in this municipality, right? So I think there's some exciting possibilities with this, and you know, I definitely something in Will County we're building power around, and you know, going to look to advance.
Thank you. I just want to encourage the group to, if you have any questions, to put them in the chat as we start doing some more questions, or as I pose some questions to the panelists. So just a reminder on that. But I would like to know, so this report was conducted prior to the COVID pandemic. So can one of our panelists go into how the COVID pandemic has affected hiring and working conditions in the temp industry?
Well,
it definitely changed the hiring dynamic. I could say that.
Go ahead, Monique.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just said that it was definitely changing the hiring dynamic. I think now more so that oddly, there might be a contradiction. It's still, you know, the rise in hiring and the need for workers. And as they're putting it out there, we're getting back and the world's getting back together. Still, some people say they have a lack in finding employment. I feel better opportunities are available though because of the COVID.
What do you think? Well, I think like this, the COVID really messed our industry up because at the time of COVID, everything was moving very slow and people didn't know whether they were going to work today or tomorrow. Or the fear, people was thinking that they would get sick off of one another. And with our company, we did everything we could to make everybody feel safe. And I personally passed out a lot of masks to people that was in fear. And I gained a relationship with not just me and Spanish people, because now all the Spanish people love me because they feel that I care about them to give them better masks. And I was telling them, they was asking me, did the company give me these masks? I say, no, Father Chuck, he was one of the board members. He gave us these masks. He said he wanted us to be safe at this company because I told him I needed a mask. And then instead of him giving me one mask, he gave me a lot of them. So I passed it out to basically the whole company to make them feel safe at work. Then they turn around and put me on like the disinfect jobs where I went around and cleaned and made sure everything was disinfect for the workers. And they pretty much love me for all that. You know, I got a better relationship. I got a chance to know Black and brown more better. I got a chance to learn that a lot of Spanish people know English. You know what I'm saying? Because most of the time they wouldn't talk to you less than they talking around you in their own language. Now they breaking down and they trying to teach me Spanish, hola, and all that stuff. Good morning, good morning. But that's my main thing to get with a person. When I see a Spanish person, I speak to everybody. Good morning, how you doing? That goes a long way. How your day going? How you feel? And then they respect you for that. They like, oh, this guy got a heart. You know what I'm saying? So they respect me more. And they communicate. They bring me food. They give me food and stuff. So with COVID, at first, everybody was terrified of each other. They wasn't really socializing. They thought everybody had COVID. If you sneeze and cough, they would run tell on you to the HR, oh, he sneezed, he coughed. But the thing is this, that everybody sneezed, everybody gonna have catch a cold, but everybody was thinking it was COVID. So. And I was the first one with telling the company they need masks, so they wouldn't even listen to me.
Well, you know, what I'll say is that, you know, during the pandemic, and it's still happening, you know, the staffing agencies and manufacturing and warehousing were very resilient in the economy. So employment stayed up, and it was also the second worst place to be to catch COVID. It was worse than going to a party. It was worse than going to a bar. The only place that was worse was a nursing home, right? And you still had people who went to staffing agencies every day. They got in a van, also a dangerous situation, you know, and, you know, so it was you know, I would say that this particular workforce went through a lot. And I would also argue that the high rates of infection directly correlate to staffing agencies and warehousing and manufacturing employment having high rates of positivity. It's a huge workforce. 680,000 people. So warehousing and manufacturing are two of the top 5 employers in the state, right? And then another thing to keep in mind is that, you know, some of our workers took advantage of unemployment, especially early on in the pandemic. A lot of people with certain immigration statuses weren't able to take advantage of such things. So they kept working. And the Latinx community had the highest rates of infections in the whole city of Chicago, right? So I think that these were some of the trends that we saw. And, you know, the trend of discrimination, you know, I would say has continued within this, but there are certain dynamics that had huge consequences on these communities when it came to high rates of COVID infections.
So almost all of our members have gotten COVID, everybody.
That's very terrible to hear. And it's just, we know that it's like not a unique thing. It's that it is very concentrated in this industry. Another question I would like to ask is, so for the open the door report, maybe post to Brittany or Tim or Roberto, do you find these findings are reflective of the industry nationally, or is this a unique thing to Chicago and Illinois?
No, this is national. This is not just Chicago. I mean, this is how the temp industry operates. It is a market. It is a way that temp agencies market themselves. If you want to have certain kinds of workers in your workplace, if you want young workers, if you want like Latinx workers, if you want whatever kind of workers, you come to us and we will make that happen to you. That's a business practice. It's a way that temp agencies get work. And that's been documented throughout the country because Will Evans, who's a reporter for Reveal News, he did a report 4 years ago interviewing whistleblowers, like people inside of temp agencies, who said, yeah, if they want white workers, they say, the client company will say, we want hockey players. If we want black workers, they'll say, we want football players. We had one whistleblower who said, for in Spanish, they would ask for the dispatcher would send in an email. What kind of workers do you want? Do you want guapos, handsome workers, pretty boys, or feos, ugly workers, or hardworking people? And that was code for guapos was for African Americans. Feos, ugly workers, were for Latinos. And this is the type of stereotyping and in the emails and the documentation of these civil rights suits that end up coming out, it was in black and white. This is what they were doing. And this is what the insiders inside the temp agencies were telling us was going on. Now, did those turn into any claims? Not necessarily, because the workers have to file the claims with the EEOC or whoever, and then they have to wait for 6 or 7 or 8 years for some kind of settlement to happen, right? And so that's why we have to, why we have to change the enforcement practices so that they're immediate, so that workers can see, results right away, and then therefore they can speak up and, like Barry says, know what their rights are and enforce those rights.
I just want to add, just thinking about the role, kind of a historical piece, right? And I think maybe connected to this New Deal kind of concept, which is people often talk about how corporations are outsourcing blue collar work overseas, but we really don't talk enough about the strategies that companies are using right here in the US to turn blue collar jobs were heavily union, right? And now if you were to now I think it's I can't remember what the it's I think it's is it over 50% of temp jobs or blue collar? Yeah, I think it's roughly half of temp jobs are blue collar jobs now. And it's just a huge shift, right? And I think what we can see in terms of the relationship, you see, that unions power really peaked in the 1950s, but then corporations, army of lawyers and lobbyists have steadily attacked union power, and a major piece of how they've done that is through restructuring, where they're distancing the wealth accumulating parts of their companies from the labor intensive parts. And these subcontracting temp agencies are a labor only subcontractor. They're labor brokers, and they're exactly so there's this absolute relationship between union busting and these kinds of labor broker relationships. So just wanted to add that.
Let's say something about that. Yeah, when I came to Gold Standard Bacon and they had these turnarounds and they kept turning the employees around after their 90 days, the union wasn't realizing that they had potential union members that was being turned around. As soon as it was time for them to be a union member, the employee will be turned around, and then that just keep the agency steady making money off the temp workers instead of getting them the job that they should have had in 90 days. So the union didn't know that. Now they're trying to keep up with who's coming in the door, how many temp workers there is, how many regular workers there is. Because being a temp worker is not a good thing. There is no insurance, no health care benefits. You get nothing. All you do is get a straight paycheck, no holiday pay, no vacation pay. So people don't want to keep being a temp worker. They want to be a temp to hire. You know what I'm saying? They don't want to keep being temp workers forever. Because this is the way the world going. Temp workers and revolving the temp workers. So now the temp agency is making a lot of money if they not getting these people in, getting them hired. They just letting them fire people in 90 days and then rehire the same people after 30 days. They getting away with that. So that means you're gonna be a temp worker for a very long time. Like me, myself, I was a temp worker for 8 months for Pacton. And then at the cup company, I was a temp worker for 8 months. But then when I learned my rights at Gold Standard Bacon, I was a temp worker for 90 days. So then I got the job. So that's the most important thing. Getting the people to know their rights and getting them hired to a job. Because temp workers don't get nothing. They don't get no insurance. They don't get medical, none of that. So just to say a temp worker catch COVID-19, what they do? Nothing. They don't have nothing. And then at the factories, when the COVID first jumped off, then nobody try to get them 6 feet or learn nothing about COVID. All the temp workers working on top of each other. When you get in the van ride, 13 deep. And the van be full. So one person could infect the whole 13 people. They wasn't breaking it down 6 people, they were just putting you in the factory.
So kind of related to that, Monique did pose a question in the chat. You know, if we did have the use of whistleblowers and the use of a union to get workers those protections, do you think the incentive program will be widely accepted? Just thoughts on like the ability to actually get this program, because it would help a lot combating this discrimination and ensuring that workers have know their rights and have fair pay, working conditions, and safety.
I was just typing.
I don't think.
Sorry, Roberto.
Go for it.
Oh, I'll go quick. I was just typing back that, you know, I think you can look to like programs in other cities that are kind of like similar programs that are like forcing the corporations at the top. I mean, it sounds like these big name corporations, but you find leverage points and you force them to the table to sign an agreement. We've seen, you know, workers in some of the hardest industries, right? In farm work and garment and, you know, and folks are where, you know, I think that's like the original gig work, right? Is the farm worker. And definitely like the migrant industry, I think is notorious for their like unsafe practices, right? Internationally. And so, you know, I think there's just something hopeful to look at in the terms of like the fact that they have been able to win these kinds of programs through the kind of campaign that that you all are talking about. That's all.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be. I mean, I think people are going to fight us tooth and nail on this, but that we have to leverage the power and we have to particularly expose the lawlessness. And, you know, our public officials and corporations are saying that they're anti-racist, that they have good values, but this shows that there's a huge problem. And how are we going to address it? how are we going to address it? So I think that we have the data to back it up. We need the leadership, and that, you know, that includes worker leadership, but it includes political leadership. And we have to organize to get this program in place to be able to curtail the most egregious activities within corporate America's supply chain. That's who's ultimately responsible. The staffing agencies and the third-party logistics companies and a lot of these entities, they're bottom feeders, right? But who's really responsible? It's the retailer, it's the client company, right? So we need to look at who ultimately makes these decisions and then put the mechanism in place to curtail this lawlessness, to stop racism, to say this is completely unacceptable in our society. And if we start to deal with this, we can get the warehouses organized and we can have a vibrant middle class. That's what this means. 3.5% of the nation's GDP moves in and out of Will County. People are nostalgic, Caterpillar left, the steel industry left, all this, you know, all the things that people associate with a middle class, blue collar labor movement. Like, we don't necessarily miss that work. We miss unions. We miss the labor movement. That's what people miss. And Amazon and Walmart and Home Depot have more wealth than any of those steel makers our Caterpillar ever had, right? But we have to end this lawlessness in this way of keeping out the union, right? Because that's ultimately it is to drive down labor standards. But part of this structure is to make it impossible to organize. So we have to come in and address it. That's why we support this innovative program, because it's a leverage point that we can use to eventually get to the point where this industry can be organized. But the sooner we can get rid of the lawlessness of the staffing agencies, the easier it's going to get for us.
Yes, that is great. And I think this kind of goes off on that. I guess you kind of mentioned this program would be next steps locally, but what would be next steps nationally to get those corporations to kind of adhere? So can you kind of elaborate on what are the next steps that can help nationally? Because this is clearly not a problem that is directed toward Chicago and Illinois. It's a nation problem, a national problem.
I think what I can speak to is, you know, there's a organization who's not here today, the Temp Worker Justice, who we've all of us here, Warehouse Workers for Justice and Chicago Workers Collaborative are partners with, and you know, and through Temp Worker Justice, we're really working on building up connections between the groups that are organizing temp workers around the country in other places. And one of the things that we're, you know, hoping to do is to work with some of our other local organizing partners who are organizing temps to kind of do a similar research and organizing. You know, I think what we maybe haven't spoken to is just, you know, I think we really are trying to, like, you know, we're both like doing this thing where we're producing credible evidence of hiring discrimination, but also doing it in a way that's very in collaboration with the groups on the ground and about, you know, supporting them and meeting their local organizing needs, right, in the process. Like, we didn't just hire, you know, students to do the testing. It was the leaders of the organizations themselves on the ground, you know, taking on the testing. And anyways, all to say that that we're building some national infrastructure and hoping to replicate this kind of model of research and documentation of this particular problem. And then we can also be increasingly, hopefully, convening folks to across that are working with temps in different parts of the country to kind of share notes and, you know, hopefully build some momentum for these types of solutions nationwide. Yeah.
So Monique did bring up a question if there is possible legislation that would be considered. And I wonder if people would be able to discuss if the Protecting the Right to Organize Act would impact the temp industry at all, or how that would play, because it would, you know, restore people's rights or to organize and make it easier for workers to organize. I'd love to know anyone's thoughts.
Well, one thing we have to understand is that there would also have to be changes in the way that the National Labor Relations Act is applied to temp work, because under the present way that it is interpreted, it's almost impossible for temp workers to organize into a union. The only way that they're able to move into a union is if there's temp workers in a shop where there is a union present, and we can try to eliminate the temp positions and put them into direct hire jobs. But that's only a certain percentage of the private sector, right? So unionizing temp workers is really a very hard proposition to do, and or any other type of gig worker or non-standard sort of work arrangement. So that's why the idea of going to the suppliers at the top of the chain and putting pressure on them to agree to their supply chain being part of a seal of approval program is the way that we see that we can exert power over the procurement system, which would then enable to have something similar to a union contract, but it's in some ways, but there's differences to it, right? Because it would not be like an NLRB election. It would be pressure at the top, and then these are what the standards are. Workers have a say in those standards, but at the end of the day, there's an enforcement regime that is somewhat better than arbitration, somewhat better than the way unionism happens, where there's just sort of a service of the union members and not as much activism on the shop floor as in this particular case. So yeah, that's the challenges of the temp industry.
Were you going to comment, Brittany, or you just was on? Okay, no worries. So we are getting close to the end of the panel, and I know you, in the chat, Monique and Brittany, you did mention it in the chat, but just so people who are not looking at the chat, if there will be another survey conducted geared towards COVID and discrimination correlation, and if there are other, are you planning to do studies in other cities as well? Would be love to know that.
Yeah, I think what we have planned is, to hopefully do this same kind of study which this was like the first time it's ever been done, and we've only done it in Chicago, and we definitely have folks who are experiencing, who are working with temp workers who are experiencing discrimination in the South and or on the West Coast. So it's like, could we do this same thing in those other places? So that, it's just sort of documenting what we know, which is like, this is not just a Chicago problem, but it's actually this is what temp agencies are about. But in terms of your specific question, that's not something that we've specifically talked about. I know that Warehouse Workers for Justice recently did something specifically, a report on and a survey on COVID, but I don't think we've put those things together, like COVID and discrimination, and looked at it closely, in this moment, what it looked like, I think you're muted.
Yeah, sorry. So I want to give the panelists any chance to give final thoughts as we're coming to a close. And if anyone has any other questions, I just want to give them that chance.
Well, I appreciate meeting everyone. Thank you for the opportunity. And again, if anything else comes up, I should hope I cross your mind for assistance. Lord have mercy, I forgot your name. In the yellow shirt. I applaud your effort and congratulations on getting all that started, though.
My question is
Barry Rose, yes, I'm sorry. Thank you.
who helping the COVID people that catch COVID? Nobody ain't helping the COVID people that catch COVID. When they telling people to go home and quarantine for 14 days, that's 14 days without pay. That's 14 days that you missing money. Because I know when my company did not help me when I was dealing with COVID. They didn't do anything for us. They only just told us to go here to unemployment office, which they know you was stuck in the house for 14 days. The unemployment place was closed down, and you had to do everything by computer. Well, all the people that don't have computers, you know what I'm saying? The Latino workers that can't go to the doctor, and who was helping them? Nobody was helping us. They all want
That's
to know.
why I said thank you for helping out. You know, when you always need a champion to step up for the little guys, and definitely you doing it.
Because what if something else come around and we don't have no help?
Exactly.
Really ain't got no help. The company suffered because no help, no lack knowledge, nowhere to go. Did nobody come to see me or see why I caught COVID or where COVID came from or in the company or none of that? They just treated me like I was the outlaw. I'm just so lucky I survived it.
I would just end by saying, just to emphasize the point made earlier, we don't think this is unique to Chicagoland, and that this is a widespread problem. I know that there's people here from different academic institutions, different unions, different spaces where people are thinking about these kinds of problems deeply. And, we welcome the collaboration to really try to reel this in because I can't emphasize enough how much it's hurt people. And we saw a profound impact with these dynamics and the COVID crisis in these workplaces, right? And these discriminatory efforts and lowering of labor standards, we believe led to the unnecessary loss of life. And that's something, as the leader of this organization, I have a responsibility to internalize and take seriously. And I think one of the things we can do positively is work to change these dynamics after the COVID crisis. I think the PRO Act's a part of that. I think a Green New Deal is a part of that. I think there's a lot of things that we can do and should do, but we have to fight discrimination in these workplaces and bring it to an end, because that is going to be a part of having a healthier and stronger labor movement. And it's also a pathway to get Amazon organized and Walmart organized and control their points of distribution and have leverage over some of the most powerful corporations in the entire world. So we welcome working with everyone here. We're excited, that everyone came to join us and listen, and thank you.
Well, sincerely, thank you all. Thank you, Tim, Brittany, Roberto, Monique, and Barry for joining us in this lively discussion. And thanks to the audience that joined us too. I also want to thank Patrick and Lily from helping organize this panel and the conference. So with that, I think we're good. Again, thank you everyone for joining us, and I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon. And I highly encourage you to join the plenary brief tomorrow, as well as continuing concurrent sessions until Saturday.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.